Hello, and welcome to English 329B, English Literature on Film in the 21st Century. I'm Dr. Joseph Byrne, and I'm the instructor for the course. This is a one-take video for The Tempest. Now you may be asking, what is a one-take video? Well, you may have heard the film term, a take. A take is an attempt to take a shot, and film directors often take multiple takes for any given shot, sometimes dozens, sometimes hundreds, to get the shot that they want. So when I say this is a one-take video, I mean that I'm going to attempt to get it all done in one try. Now, what I'm going to be doing in these one-take videos, and I'll be doing one for each of the films in the course, is actually I'm going to be talking mostly about the books, the literary end of things, rather than the film, which I feel like I covered pretty well in my film essay. Also in these videos, these are basically sidebar sort of features to give you a taste of what my lecture style might be like. So you just get to see my talking head, but at least you get to see some personality behind the instructor. You don't get that at Elms. So let me start by talking about my life with the Bard. That is my relationship with William Shakespeare. Shakespeare is so prevalent in our culture that people my age, maybe people your age, can talk about their life with their Bard, their lifelong fascination and with William Shakespeare. My first memory of Shakespeare or Shakespeare books was looking at my mother's small collection of Shakespeare plays that she had from her college days when she took a Shakespeare course. I was too young to really read these books, but I wasn't too young to color in them, so some of them had crayon marks. Could have been one of my siblings, could have been me. When I got to high school, took my first encounter with Shakespeare in high school was in my sophomore year in an English class, and as many English classes do with Shakespeare, we did a modern updating of in our case, The Merchant of Venice. I was Antonio, or Tony, and I think I had one line. And I remember very well how I delivered my line on the day that we decided to actually produce our production of the play on the school stage and videotape it. And my very eloquent line went like, that is, I forgot my line. Anyway, once I got to college, my past failure in Shakespeare didn't prevent me from joining the theater company, and we did a couple Shakespeare plays. And the first one we did that I was in was The Taming of the Shrew, and I played the young love interest, Lucentio. I burn, I pine, I perish. So I remember at least one of my lines from that play. Also in college, I had a ball cap that had Shakespeare written on the top of it. I thought it was so clever to me to have this literary hat, and I wore it everywhere until someone pointed out to me that actually it was a hat that advertised Shakespeare fishing gear. I didn't know there was such a thing, but apparently Shakespeare makes fishing gear. So I'm looking at my notes here. I was in a second Shakespeare play in college, and that was Romeo and Juliet, and I played the County Paris, the man that Juliet kills herself rather than to marry. So anyway, I'm still a little bitter that Juliet chose that slacker over me, but I don't really blame her. I had to wear tights for that production, and I looked terrible in tights. I have very knobby knees, so Anyway, that's why I'm not an actor. Instead, I'm a professor. I did take a Shakespeare course in college, and actually it was one of the few B's I got. Partially because in my big paper I tried to argue that Shakespeare was Catholic, and the professor was not having any of that. But I think he did say it was a good try, but he wasn't convinced in the end. Okay. So the Shakespeare is actually, the Tempest is a late addition to the syllabus. Initially I had Alice in Wonderland as the first film, the one directed by Tim Burton. But frankly, I came to the conclusion it just wasn't a very good film. And I thought I needed some Shakespeare. There's been a lot of Shakespeare films, and I thought one of them should be on the syllabus. One of them made after the year 2000, and in that case, that I think there's a couple that could fit the bill there, but the one I chose was The Tempest by Julie Taymor, partially because I really admire Julie Taymor, and also I needed a woman director on the syllabus. Taymor is one of the more prominent Shakespeare adapters to film right now, I would say. The first film that she did was Titus, which is a version of Shakespeare's Titus Andronicus. Then she did The Tempest. She most recently did a very highly acclaimed Broadway production of A Midsummer's Night Dream. So I would not be surprised to see that come to the screen sometime, directed by Julie Taymor, though of course there's been many versions of that play on film. Okay, I'm just going to talk a little bit more about the book. I said at the beginning of this video that I'm going to be focusing mostly on the book, and when I say that, I'm talking about the book as like a material object, so not just as a container for content, but actually a reading technology that is quite brilliant in its own way, though it's been eclipsed by the many other technologies, digital particularly, in our lives today. Okay, here's the book I'm talking about, my version of the play of Shakespeare, the Pelican Shakespeare, the collected works. So this includes his poetry as well as all his plays. It's a hefty volume for sure. Let me just show you a couple of things about it, about the book as material object. This one starts with the opening pages of Shakespeare's, of the 1623 folio, collected works of Shakespeare. So not long after his death, and his Elizabethan contemporaries, this is what they would have been reading and looking at, and this is a portrait of the author, but it's pretty likely that Shakespeare looked like. This is the 1623 facsimile version, basically a photographic reproduction of the 1623 folio, and this is it's called the catalog, but it's really the table of contents. You'll notice that the Tempest is listed first. In fact, it comes first in the 1623 folio. In fact, it was most likely the last play that Shakespeare wrote, but in the folio it was given a premier place at the very front of the folio. So when I talk about the book as a material object, in a scholarly book, I'm talking also about what's called the critical apparatus, all the little parts of the book that help scholars. So in a general introduction, index, oftentimes illustrations, notes, in particularly, you really need notes for Shakespeare, collations, so versions, comparing different versions, different editions, what have you. A lot of that in Shakespeare as well. This is a picture of the Globe Theater, so that's part of the general introduction. All right, let me just jump to the play itself. This is the Tempest. Again, it's at the front of the 1620 folio, but it's typically at the end of most collected editions of Shakespeare, since it was one of the last plays he did. Now, what I want to point out here is the notes. Really, in Shakespeare, it's really difficult to read any of Shakespeare without explanatory notes. Basically, translating Elizabethan English, which is also considered modern English, with the English that we speak today. So, two very different languages, but really, again, impossible to do Shakespeare without those notes, which raises all sorts of questions about film versions. There are no notes in film versions, no subtitles, though I'm surprised no one has tried that before. So if you can't really understand the language when you're reading it without the notes, it's really hard to do it while you're seeing a film version. So there are different strategies for dealing with that in terms of context, really, visual context, helping to explain language and what have you. But with Shakespeare, really, his brand is really all about his language. I mean, we love his language. We don't really understand it, but we love the musicality of it. So I'm just raising all this because these are things that, you know, the critical apparatus, the technology of the book, the language being used, how do you translate that to film? That's a big question. So in these videos, I'm going to continually raise that question, and I'll be raising that question in my my film essays as well, because these are really the main questions and issues that we're dealing with in a class that's dedicated to film adaptations of literary works. So I'll stop there. Hopefully I can upload this and you can see it, and then I will go on to the next video and hopefully be more timely in getting these videos out.